Today I will be telling you about my personal testimony and how God has impacted me throughout my years of growing up. This never was a significant event, but instead a progression of thoughts and of ideas of how certain people impacted the way I thought. That eventually helped me grow into who I am today. Just to start, when I was a child, I grew up in a Christian family. I went to a private school all the way until I was in ninth grade. Here, I was being heavily surrounded by Christian ethics and teaching. I remember in the early stages of kindergarten, I overheard conversations of two women speaking, and they were speaking fondly of their son who recently accepted Christ. And so then on, I remember wanting to accept Christ to receive the same attention and recognition. And so after that, I claimed that I was a Christian, but I did not understand the implications of the depth of this simple proclamation. So I continued to hear a lot about Jesus growing up and how he has impacted, but because of how long ago that happened, it didn't really affect me, and instead Jesus was an example for me to live my life, just as a simple rules or good conducts to follow, to be like a good moral person. So I didn't see a need for a savior because I didn't see the world as a broken place. Because I lived in a Christian bubble that kept me from the reality of the world, right? It kept me away from the truth that I was flawed and the brokenness in my world. It allowed me to not hear the sorrows of the world, what was going on in the other parts of the world. So my faith was solely focused on myself and the reputations others had about me. Going into middle school, my knowledge of Christianity grew as I grew in intellect as well. In middle school, I came to the realization that humans would have a final destination, heaven or hell. It really struck me, or I really was afraid that, what if I was going to hell? And so I didn't want to end there. So that really allowed me to self-reflect where my faith was, and to make sure that I had some sense of security that my final destination would be in heaven. So my view of God changed into this, instead of these conducts that are examples to follow, not really relevant, to something a little bit more relevant, that I started to see Jesus Christ as only a golden ticket to heaven. That was it. So I started to treat God as such. And I abused his grace. After finding security in the statement, the proclamation of faith that I believe, I thought I could do whatever I want. That no matter what I did in my earthly life, I was set because I had that golden ticket. So I lived a life in which I abused God's grace. I continued to live a life totally based off my fears and selfish desires, as I felt secure in my final destination. So I eventually graduated from high school and started attending the University of Texas at Dallas. The way that I lived my life prior to college was unsatisfying. I struggled with insecurities. I struggled with finding friends. And so when I entered college, I wanted to pursue these things. I wanted to find a sense of value from friends, a sense of confidence from my relationships with friends. So my freshman year, my parents wanted me to join a Christian fellowship. So I did, as there's people there and I wanted to have that sense of confidence in them and not of God. So when I did, I would go to every single event. I would go to 2 Bible studies, just to feel love and find friendship. I didn't go to the Bible studies to find who God was and learn about him. I went just to have some sort of relationships with others. Over the spring break of that year in March, I just felt really sad and broken and dissatisfied for where I was in life. I felt still alone despite this lot of attendance to events. And so that moment, I decided to be even more involved in the fellowship and would talk to as many people as I knew. I would go out of my way just to socialize with people, to feel included, and to have some sorts of value. And that began my pursuit of something that was still unfulfilling and left me miserable. But thankfully, due to God's sovereignty and His endless pursuit of me, 2 weeks, basically a week after that, I changed my goals and I started to be more active. That March, there's a guy named Steve, and he was heavily impacted by the Lord, and he was called to minister to young guys. And so when I was gonna start purpose hanging out with other people, he started hanging out with other people as well. He was doing it to minister, to see young guys to minister to, while I was doing it to find satisfaction in humans. And so here, we started hanging out. We started talking a lot, and he definitely allowed me to question and self-reflect on my relationship with God. Before I knew it, God placed Steve to influence and impact my life. We then studied Matthew 5 together and compared Jesus' teachings and the Pharisees' teaching, which allowed me to question my faith. And then that's when I began to grasp the gospel in its entirety. I began to grasp the depth of who God was. I began to understand how broken I was and how much of a sinner I was and how good God was. It was then when I started changing my mind about God and my relationship with God, and this desire to grow in Him and to just be satisfied in Him alone changed from those events in March. My view of God started to be more holistic and accurate, and I started to find purpose and self-worth from truth in the scriptures. In conclusion, God has transformed my life since then. I've grown in my love for Him as well as His people. I have felt God's call into ministry based off the last 3 years, just due to the events that have happened that has completely made me take a U-turn, in which I can clearly see God's sovereign hand on my timeline. The impact He has made in my life is a testament to His goodness and His steadfast love.